Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. You know what's really important to me when I do business with a company is trust and transparency. I've been telling you now for a good while about my buddy Damon Burton and his company, SEO National, because trust and transparency are just as important to them. You know, for the last 15 years, in the search engine optimization space, they have been leading the way and serving people tremendously well. Now, for those of you that don't know what SEO is, it stands for search engine optimization. It helps you show up higher on Google searches so that folks that are looking for what you have find you quicker. And you know what's really encouraging? More revenue, more sales, growing your business. Do me a favor, get in touch with Damon and his team today at SEO National at 855-736-6285 or go to SEOnational.com and get your free quote and tell them you heard it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. I hope you're ready, because here comes a dynamite conversation on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. It is so cool when I get to have guests on that I've admired their work and get to see them from afar. But then when we get to come together close up, it's even better. And my guest is the Outbound Sales Guy. It is so cool because I have a sales background, and Martin is the Outbound Sales Guy. You can find him on LinkedIn at Martin MacArthur, and he helps early stage companies generate qualified sales meetings. We'll get into that. We'll get into a lot of other stuff. We'll tell Martin's story. But it's my honor to welcome my friend, my guest, Martin MacArthur, to the Intentional Encourager podcast. Martin, how you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks, Brian, for having me on, and excited to be here. And as a lot of people who have heard my story before and you know me, and they know I'm always happy to share my experiences and in my journey today. So happy to be here. Let's get going.
Hey, Martin, that sounds good. Let's start here. You've had a different kind of experience, and I've been asking this question the last 2 years around the COVID-19 pandemic because I really want to get a sense of what everybody's experience is like. I can watch the news, I can say, hey, we've had this or had that, but I want to know uniquely what your experience has been like. You've been through a couple of things with your health. We were talking before we got started recording, but take me through the last couple of years around what you've kind of seen and noticed through the COVID-19 pandemic, and maybe a lesson that you learned from it that you'll take with you after it's all said and done.
That's a great question because there's been a lot going on over these last 2 years, and depending on where you are, we're navigating slowly out of it. We're full throttle or kind of still in a holding pattern. So, that kind of varies depending on where you are. But for me personally, so as someone who is immunocompromised and had to be very diligent in make sure that I didn't get any kind of infection or risk around this COVID nonsense, and I don't mean that in a bad way, just COVID
right
in general, right? But what I've experienced is we've had a lot of isolation, with people having to be at home and lockdowns and so forth, which I think's been good to an extent because it's forced people to maybe take stock of their conversations, their relationships, which I think is a good thing. They haven't been able to enjoy some luxuries, right? Like, going to different events and traveling and so forth. So there's been more, I think, more family time, which is, as someone who has a close family, I think that's good for those who maybe we're able to reconnect and form some of those stronger bonds. But from a business standpoint, what I've constantly have heard in the world is that it's forced leadership and business owners to kind of take stock of, okay, we've been, especially when it comes to sales development, outbound sales, inside sales, they've had to kind of change their mindset from, okay, we can just attend these different events, we can go out and have these folks in the field and just have the folks internally follow up with leads and open opportunities for these folks in the field and at events.
Yeah.
Well, that's no longer the case, right? So they've had to change their whole, maybe like those companies that have been used to that whole external environment, they've had to transition to an internal environment. And I think that's been challenging, but also kind of open them up to, okay, well, now we've got more opportunity because we can go further and wider than before.
I love what you said there about, and there's a couple things that I want to park on and just take our conversation a little bit deeper. I love what you said about changing the mindset in business, because there's an old saying that we've had in sales for years: we do what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always got. Or you go back to, and we used to call them, when I was out in the field, Martin, we would call them honey holes. We would say, okay, this particular part of my territory does well. I can always go back and tap into that and pull extra business out of that. Or this customer, that's a great customer, and I can always pull a little bit extra business out of them when I need a bump or something like that. You couldn't do that in the last couple of years, because those customers that you could traditionally count on were facing their own challenges. They were facing their own issues. And I love what you said there. What have you seen from a mindset change? I know you touched on it a minute ago, from external to internal, but what else have you seen? Let me go here. Forgive me for doing this to you. I want to change the thought process around this question. What has been the feedback that you've heard from customers around how they've had to change their own mindset around their business? Maybe they invested more in training before, they're pulling back. Maybe they've invested in other things and pulled back. What are you hearing about the mindset of customers in the last couple of years that's been surprising to you?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. So the biggest thing has been twofold. So there's been more openings or opportunities, because people are either unfortunately they were let go and laid off, or they've decided, okay, they've had more free time in it because they're not commuting or whatever. So they started a side hustle. Now they're slowly transitioning that side hustle into a full-time gig.
Yeah.
But the companies the customers, they're investing in two aspects. They're investing in sales and enablement. So making sure that the reps that they have that continue to stay on, or that they can, as they grow now with things starting to pick up a little bit more, the reps that they bring on, new reps, they want to make sure that they are armed with every aspect that the buyer is looking for, because buyers over the last 2 years have changed how they like to buy, right? Like they want that Amazon type experience, right? Where they can just go consume. Okay, I know that there's these 3 vendors in my space. I'm going to go and research them and gather as much feedback before I even say, hey, okay, I want to learn more.
Forgive me for jumping in there. You gave us something incredible there. And I've got to pivot there for forgive me, Martin, but you hit something there that I had to get you to talk a little bit deeper about.
Yeah.
What you were talking about is the buyer transitioning to a consumer, if I heard you correctly, and that's what's. Here's what I heard out of that part of the conversation, and I want you to expound on that a little bit, because that is absolutely brilliant. Because what's happened is in sales, and I've been in sales for well over 20 years, is you educate your customer, you convince them on the features and benefits, right? All the traditional things that we've been talking about in sales forever. And now all of a sudden, the buyer says to themselves, I can buy differently, and now I'm going to buy like everybody else buys instead of how someone tells me how to buy.
That's right.
And I love that. I love that how you've identified that shift, because to a lot of salespeople, it's almost as if their buyers are now speaking a foreign language. It would be like me talking to you in English and you answering me in French. There's no way I would be able to understand it. And I love what you said there. Please go a little bit deeper on that, because that is such brilliant insight. And I've not heard anybody really talk about how buyers have flipped. Instead of buying, they're consuming, and they're consuming in different ways. That is so profound, Martin. Please go a little deeper there.
Yeah, for sure. So where I'm coming from is from the sales development and top of funnel aspect, because that's where I spend all my time. But what I really mean by the buyer now is consuming. So they have a plethora of various channels that they can consume information on, right? Like they can be working, but they can also listen to your podcast in the background, or they can have a TikTok or YouTube or like video, some type of video on the background. Or if they're a reader, they can go and while they're working out or having a coffee, they can read. So there's all these different mediums of ways for the buyer and prospect to be able to consume. So instead of traditionally, right, before, think of this. So you have a sales development rep. Typically what would happen is they would go and they send out an email, or they connect with you on LinkedIn, or they pick up the phone and call you. Mm-hmm. And they try and jam something down your throat in order to get a meeting. Well, now that sales development rep needs to be a thought leader. They need to be creating information, content that's relevant, that engages, educates, excites your prospect, because they're consuming all this information and they're going to dictate when they're ready to take a meeting, which will lead to when they're ready to purchase and go through your sales process.
There's two things that come to mind when I hear you talk about that. Let's step aside, take a quick break, and I want to pivot there, because again, you are just bringing a lot of great stuff to us today. And there's a couple things that just came to mind when you talked about that. I am talking to the Outbound Sales Guy. His name is Martin MacArthur. He is a sales development coach, helps companies with revenue growth, outbound sales, sales development strategies. This is great conversation. If you're a business owner, you want to dial into the rest of this conversation. We're going to get into Martin's story a little bit later. But Martin's just bringing some incredible nuggets today. We're going to step aside, take a break, come back with us on this episode of the Intentional Encourager podcast. Back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton here. The new year is upon us, and you may be sitting there thinking, hey, I would really love to pay off some debt, or I would like to save for that dream vacation. Maybe you want to buy a new car. Whatever it is you want to do financially in the coming year, let me give you a great piece of intentional encouragement and something to think about that might help you do it. Products for Profit. Now, this is a course taught by my good friend Joe Hart, who's been a guest on the Intentional Encourager podcast and has told his story how reselling changed his life. And you know what, folks? It could do the same thing for you too. It's really simple. Reselling is basically buying a product and then reselling it online for more money. And Joe is going to take you through the steps and show you how to do this either part-time or maybe, as some of his students have done, take this full-time as well. Go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/premium PFP. And oh, by the way, this group is going to help you find leads of products that are profitable right now, give you all kinds of great intentional encouragement, and you're going to be surrounded by a community of people that are going to want to see you be successful in the reselling game. Again, go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/premium PFP and tell him you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Martin, before we went to break, there were a couple things that you really hit on that I love. You were talking about salespeople becoming thought leaders and content creators. That's really powerful because here's what I thought about. And forgive me for using this analogy, and I hope I don't offend some people or turn people off. But I thought about when we consume a meal, our body absorbs part of that meal, but then a lot of that meal is excreted in waste. And that's what, when you're creating a lot of content and things like that, your buyers are going to take and absorb some things that really resonate with them. And maybe some of the content goes out of them in waste. In other words, it just, they kind of take it out of their mind or whatever. But if you can have two or three things, this is my thought around that, what you just said. And I love the way you talked about it. And forgive me for taking a really good thought and bringing a terrible analogy to it. But that's the only way I could kind of think about it is, we take in a lot of information ourselves. Everybody does. We absorb some of it and retain it. And some of it just goes out as waste. So I love that thought around that. But I want to go back to something you said just a minute ago about the opportunities existing for not only buyers, but for salespeople. And I've always felt like this as a former sales manager and people developer and things like that. The worst thing I thought we could do as a company was release good talent into the marketplace for our competitors to consume them or to bring them into their fold. I've always thought that was a terrible mistake. And you just hit the nail on the head. The pandemic either forced indirectly or directly some companies, or some companies intentionally chose to release great talent into the market. And I think to myself, why am I going to do something to help my competition by releasing great talent into the market? What do you think we'll see the ramifications of what we've gone through the last couple of years? Kind of put your crystal ball, your crystal hat on or whatever it is, just some kind of forward-thinking cap. How do you think the next 5 years will be shaped by what we've gone through the last 2 years in sales?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question.
That's pretty deep. Hey, man, I can come up with them from time to time. It's not often. It's probably like Haley's Comet or something like that, once every 75 years.
So what you're saying is, good thing we got it recorded. So
yeah, exactly right, man. That's exactly right. Yeah.
I think one of the things definitely is that, and we're kind of experiencing it a bit currently, is there's going to be more saturation in the marketplace. So like you're going to have competition, right? I always think like competition is good because there's enough business to go around for everyone. But also in the same sense, I think you'll see some consolidation, with some mergers, acquisitions, what have you. But also I see artificial intelligence and technology really continuing to evolve and support, not replace, support the sales function in the whole, as well as a lot of other industries. You're already seeing it in retail and medical. Some manufacturing is transitioning.
Yeah.
So it's just that's the evolution we're in. What is it? We're in the third revolution, technology revolution, right? So I think that's just going to continue to evolve and be better for all involved.
And Martin, I love what you said there about the evolution, right? Because I can remember 25 years ago now, 25 years ago for me, I was 23 or 24 years old.
I was just a kid.
Yeah, I took a sales job with a food distributor. And part of my training, in air quotes, was my sales manager made me listen to cassette tapes of a guy and at that time, these tapes were probably 20 years old themselves. And it was old school sales training and things like that. And I still remember some of those concepts. But now the salesperson is constantly evolving. The business person is constantly evolving. And I love what you said about AI, artificial intelligence, being a big component of that. Let's speak to the business owner for just a second. Because to me, I feel like business, being an entrepreneur today, is more layered and nuanced, and in some ways can be more challenging than it's ever been. You've got so many. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the best challenges, but it is a challenge.
Go with that. Go with that. I want to hear your thoughts around that. I can park what I was going to say. Go with that, what you were talking about there.
Yeah. So especially like if you're a company that has no funding, right? You're just doing it from your own savings, you're bootstrapping. It's challenging because you know that, okay, I need some of these tools, technology, people, what have you, in order to be successful. But okay, I know I don't have the financial capital to invest in those, so I need to prioritize where do I invest my dollars. But then also, you're responsible for everything: marketing, finance, invoicing, human resources, sales, the whole strategy. Like every facet of the business is on your shoulders.
Yeah.
And it can be overwhelming.
Well, and here's the thing too, it can be overwhelming for salespeople because the volume of information that salespeople have now is incredible. I mean, just the library. And Martin, here's the thing. A lot of times a salesperson can get training on the fly right here on their phone.
Yep.
You know, they can read a post from you, or and forgive me, I'm going to leave out friends of mine, so I'm just going to but there are tons of friends of both of ours that are just putting out incredible content. If a salesperson is following the right people on LinkedIn or on Instagram or on Facebook or on Twitter, they can literally get sales trained in an instant. They can get ongoing sales training instantaneously. They can spend 30 minutes just combing through posts and have phenomenal sales training.
I would put a caveat to that.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, go ahead.
That you can, yes, you have all that information at your disposal, and you hit on the right, on a good point there. Follow the right people. However, what I always say is absorb, consume, and then figure out, does this work for me? Because just because it's working for a couple people and they're having success doesn't mean that it's going to be successful for you. It doesn't mean that it's going to fit your personality, your vernacular, right? Like you need to be, you need to have some common sense and be like, I don't really think that's going to work for me, which is fine, right? Like move on, but also feel free to be, creative and put your own spin on it. And if you have success, then go share it with people. Create a post and be like, this is what worked for me.
Yeah.
And you'll be surprised at what kind of feedback you get from that.
And Martin, I love that, again, such great nuggets today on this podcast. And what you said is, messaging, you've got marketing people that are trying to, and I'm not downing marketing people. I'm not trying to be critical, but it feels like messaging today is almost trying to be universal. And here's what I mean by that. Sports gambling, I listen to sports talk radio quite a bit. And if in an hour, I will hear anywhere from 3, whether it's a live read from the host, whether it's a commercial, a produced commercial, either for FanDuel or DraftKings or Bet Rivers. I have zero interest in gambling. I don't want to gamble. That's not, but I'm constantly being inundated like, well, your state now, West Virginia now is allowing gambling. And if you have I almost get to the point where it's like, if I hear another gambling ad, I'm going to turn it off and that host is going to suffer because I'm not listening anymore. Yep. And I feel like we've got to get past universal messaging that somebody says, okay, well, I'm going to create a post or I'm going to do a commercial or I'm going to do this and I'm just going to reach it. I want it to reach everybody. To me, that's lazy marketing. Figure out who you're trying to talk to and talk to those people. When you think about messaging from a sales perspective, I really want to get your thoughts on that because you were I felt like you were going there. I was like, man, I really want to pull that out. Talk about the power of messaging. Yeah, go ahead.
For sure. So a couple of years ago, I was introduced to a fellow named Matthew Pollard. He is a super smart guy, and he wrote a book called The Introvert's Edge. And it's for, I'm not necessarily an introvert, but I'm also not, I'm kind of like in between introvert and extrovert. So I was really interested to read the book, and in that book, Matthew speaks of how to, when you're networking or you're targeting or whatever you want to call it, right? In my world, it's targeting because you're targeting prospects. So basically, what he says is if you're trying to talk to everybody, you're talking to nobody. And I always thought that was really right on the mark because it's true. If you're trying to, like, going to your point, right, is you try and create this message and you just go and throw it basically at everybody, right? Yeah, you're going to hit somebody that it resonates with, but you've also you've missed out on an opportunity because you've hit the people that don't want to hear it right now. Therefore, it doesn't resonate. Now they've kind of soured on this brand, this offering, right? Because it's like, well, obviously you're not paying attention to me. Like you're not focusing in on my goals, my desires, and what's important to me. So you really need to, and this is something that a lot of founders and co-founders of early stage companies struggle with, is they don't clearly understand who it is that who they help or who it is that they want to help, because they think, well, we can help, this group, and this group. Okay, well, maybe, but let's really focus on who you can really help, how you can really help them.
Yeah.
And what is it you're helping them do? Like what are you helping them solve? Because there's, I don't know how many people on the planet, like, so just really dial in that messaging, because it's going to serve you well in the long run, opposed to turning off potential buyers and long time customers and evangelists.
Well, and Martin, what you're talking about there, and something that triggered in my mind is that I like McDonald's food. Like, I can go through there and get breakfast, or I like their food. Some people are like, I like McDonald's food. But if McDonald's came to me and said, Brian, you can have free Big Macs for a year, I don't like Big Macs. I don't like the sauce. But if they said to me, Brian, we know you don't like Big Macs. We want to give you a free Big Macs for a year. We know you don't like Big Macs. Listen, what if we took the special sauce off there? I'd be more excited. I'd be a little more excited. I'd be like, okay, now you're coming to the fence a little bit. Okay, yeah. And if they said to me, instead of the free Big Macs, if you want to you can get free Big Macs if you want, but you could also have maybe a double quarter pounder with cheese. Now you're really honing in on, okay, you're getting to where I like it. Now you're really helping me hone in on what's important to me, where I am, what connects with me, and things like that. And Martin, that was a brilliant point that you made, because too many times, and I found that as a young salesperson, probably for me from like 22 to 32, I'll say, and I'll be 50 in August, from 22 to 32. I really had to dial, I was so concerned about making sure everybody had my phone number, and you call me when you have a problem, and I want to be the one that takes care of it, and my price is better. What I learned from 32 on was, I know what problems I solve. I know what value I bring. If you buy from me, you get great product, but you're going to get something else as well too. You're going to get knowledge. You're going to get expertise. You're going to get somebody that surveys the marketplace. And it took me a good 10 years to really figure out that the stuff I thought that I was doing right, it was dumb luck. Most people liked my personality. And I had a boss that told me one time, he called me by my nickname. He called me Sexy. He said, Sexy, he says, I know why people like to talk to you. He said, because you're way more interesting than the work they actually have to do in that moment. So, he said, what he was telling me was, you really didn't talk about a whole lot, but man, you're really entertaining doing it. So, maybe that was foreshadowing for podcasting. Who knows? But I got to go here real quick, and then we'll step aside and take a break and tell your story. What's been the biggest reward for you being the outbound sales guy and the work that you've done on social media platforms like LinkedIn and things like that? What's been the most rewarding thing for you, maybe from a non-business standpoint, that's happened because of the brand that you've built?
Two things. It's getting to the opportunity to do things like this, get on some incredible podcasts and have conversations and share my journey, my story. And then also just helping people, having people come to me and say, you inspire me, or I love your content. It's been helpful for me, or I was able to book a meeting because of your content. So just being a supportive influence for those, because I strongly believe that there's a lot of people that help me along the way. So I feel like we should be lifting those up that are coming up behind us.
And I love that, Martin. And again, what drew, I'll say this, and we will take a break. what really drew me to you was just the immediate kindness, just the right there. You could see immediately in 2 or 3 of your posts the evident kindness that you talk with people and share with people. You are a genuinely kind person, and we lack that a lot of times in social media. I feel like it's people just saying, look at what I'm doing, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at this, I'm building a platform. I never got that from you, Martin, and I want to tell you that publicly. I have always seen a consistent pattern of kindness with you, and that really resonates with me. And folks, I would highly encourage you, if you're not connected to Martin on LinkedIn or you're not following him, do that. Do that today. When you're listening to the middle of this podcast, finish the podcast, and then after you finish the podcast, go to LinkedIn and connect with Martin MacArthur. And we're going to get into more of Martin's story. He is the Outbound Sales Guy, Martin MacArthur. When we come back, we're going to hear his story. You come back as well too, here on the Intentional Encourager podcast, back in just a moment. Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. I want to take a moment and tell you about my friend Harry Spate and his new book, Selling with Dignity. Harry has taken an age-old concept of sales and he's put a new twist to it, and I love the direction that he's taken with Selling with Dignity. And here's what's encouraging about Harry's book. Instead of viewing people as numbers and machines, salespeople are now given the tools and the encouragement to be dignified in their approach. Here's what Harry says. He says, selling is an honorable profession when it's done right. When sellers feel they are valuable and have integrity and respect, this opens the door for better conversations and eventually relationship. This book puts an end to sleazy sales tactics and proves why selling with dignity can be done, and it leads to massive success. And I couldn't agree more. Go to sellingwithdignity.com, get your copy today, and if you want Harry to sign it, he'll do that for you. Again, go to sellingwithdignity.com and pick up your copy today of the new book by Harry Spate, Selling with Dignity. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Martin, let's dive into your story. Man, I could have talked sales with you for another hour, but then I would miss the real crux and the real meat and the heart of who you are in this conversation. So please, I want you to take the floor. I may jump in with a question or two, but take us through your story and your journey.
Yeah, that's thank you for that, Brian, and I want to thank you for your kind words just a moment ago. It's very, very gracious and kind of you, and you know, it's overwhelming the amount of people that reach out and have the same type of message. So appreciate that. Yeah, so my story, my journey. For anyone who's now following me on LinkedIn who doesn't isn't aware already, at the age of 7, I was diagnosed with what's called juvenile retinitis pigmentosa. It's a disease that affects your retinas, and basically it causes them to detach, and it led me to become totally blind. It's fairly aggressive, and normally when people are diagnosed with RP, they get it around their early to mid 20s, but it's very aggressive. It goes pretty quickly. So I went from at the age of 7 having a little bit of sight to quickly not well. It was kind of gradual, but then aggressive. So I think it was my teenage years is when I was totally blind. I got my start in sales development. Well, I guess business, if you will, because both my parents, they own their own grocery store when I was a kid. So my two sisters and I, we always had some sort of a role working within the store, whether that was in the back rooms until we were able to be out in the on the floor engaging with customers, stocking shelves. In my sister's cases, ordering management, etc. So I really got a lot of my sales experience and knowledge just from working alongside my dad, and I really enjoyed that. And
Martin, I got to ask you, please forgive me for interrupting.
yeah,
How did you
for sure.
navigate your way through the different aisles? Because in the grocery business, resets are a common thing that happens.
Yeah.
Even in smaller grocery stores, stores will go through resets where a vendor will pay for a different piece of shelving and things like
Yep.
that. You know, I'm in the back of aisle 2. I want to be in the front of aisle 2, and I'm going to pay extra for that store reset privilege, things like that.
Yep.
How did you navigate your way when you became totally blind by the time you were a teenager? How were you able to navigate your way through the store and continue to do some of the functions that you wanted to do alongside your dad?
So I was always a laborer, always working with my dad, and you always had lifting, lugging, and passing. So always with him and on his arm, and he'd guide me through the store. And there was never an issue because I was always handing him something, and he was navigating through the aisles and so forth. But
that's incredible to me. That
it
is
was
so
also
incredible.
There was also repeat customers, right? So they get we were in a small town, so you begin to know each customer, and they get to know you. So there, people over time realized what was going on.
And you never considered it. I'm putting myself in. I'm trying to put myself in that spot because I worked in a grocery store. I worked in a decent sized grocery store. That was my first job, and I can remember, facing shelves and moving up and down the aisles and doing a lot of the things, taking things off of pallets, putting them on carts and dollies and things like that, using a box cutter. And so I'm imagining all these things, Martin, myself, and I'm amazed that you said you always considered yourself a laborer, which is contrary. And I mean this not disrespectfully. I mean this in an awe-inspiring way. Blind people, that is, and I have an uncle that's totally blind. He was legally blind when he was a child, and has become totally blind. And my uncle ran a snack bar for years. He and my aunt ran a snack bar together. And I was amazed at all the things that my uncle did. My uncle rode a bike and things like that. I'm amazed at how you just were a laborer. Was that something that you just fell in love with? Was it more that, or just being with your dad and being side by side with your dad and having a sense of helping your mom and dad be successful in their business as well?
Yeah, it was just being able to work with my dad and being able to pitch in where I could and help. We were always raised just hard work and jump in where you can. So that was where I could help, and that's where I jumped in. So
How much you
and as like early on as a child, my parents they never, well, my parents and my two sisters, they never like the thought was never to treat me differently. It was always to allow me to have experience whatever I wanted to experience, and not to be able to not be put in any kind of a bubble or anything like that.
How much sales do you think you learned working in a grocery store? Because for me, I worked in a grocery store from 17. I left right before I turned 22. So I was 5 years, five and a half, almost 5 years, from 17 to, no, I was 22. I'm sorry. I was 17 to 22. I worked in a grocery store. And for me, I felt like that was really where I learned customer service. I learned how to take care of people. How much of your sales background do you feel like came from working in your parents' grocery store?
I would say a majority of it. So, like you said, learning how to provide customer service, how to foster those relationships, because especially when you're in a smaller area, um, like there's 3 grocery stores, so people either you're all about going above and beyond and providing the best experiences possible. Because if not, well, then they're going to the store that's down the road, and there goes your sale, right? So,
Yeah.
providing those experiences, and then also interacting with various distributors, representatives, vendors, etc., and having to negotiate. I wasn't involved in a lot, but obviously you would hear different snippets of conversations of negotiations and etc. So you pick things up along the way, and then the rest of my experience I would say has come over from the various roles that I've held in you know fa- failure by fire, I guess would be the accurate term.
I love that. Failure by fire. I think we've all been there and done that. Was that a hard conversation when you wanted to kind of launch out into a sales career on your own? Was that a hard conversation to have with your mom and dad? Because the reason I ask that, Martin, is a lot of times, businesses like that become legacy businesses. The goal is start the business, hand it down to the kids, or, have the son take it over or whatever. Was that a hard conversation when you decided to kind of launch out on your own and go into a sales career, to have with your mom and dad and say, hey, I love you. I'm grateful for what this store, what your business has done for me, but it's time for me to go do something else?
Not really, because by the time I was finishing high school, my parents had sold their store, and they were transitioning into other facets. So it wasn't really much of an issue. But my dad and I, like both my parents and I, we always talk and have conversations and so forth. But my dad kind of thought that, especially, he turned it to marketing right back then, because it wasn't sales development wasn't quite the arena that it is now. But he said, maybe telemarketing is a good path for you to explore, because you don't need your site. So, kind of explored that avenue, and look at where it led.
That's incredible. And you're exactly right. Telemarketing, if you can connect with someone over the phone who you haven't seen, imagine what you can do. And when I say seen, face to face in front of them, sitting across the table from them. If you can connect with someone, you're not in the same room with them, imagine what you do sitting across the table from them. And Martin, that's brilliant. Let me ask you this. Take me through the creation of the Outbound Sales Guy. I meant to ask you this in the last segment. But
Yeah,
really, take me through that creation real quick.
So how it came about really was 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 now, I forget. I had a great opportunity to be a part of an outbound sales development agency. Unfortunately, they lost their funding, and they're no longer around. But I learned so much valuable lessons and information from that company, and I was trying to find something, and I was just kind of I wasn't having a lot of success, and I was getting frustrated. So I just started sharing some content, creating some content, and like I need a good headline, right? Like I need something that's gonna, I always say this, smack somebody in the face when they come across it. And well, what can I come up with? And I'm like, well, I'm talking about outbound sales. I've been in outbound sales a lot, and it just kind of materialized from there. And then I always, like, over the last that year that I was with the funding company, and then afterwards, I was kind of toying with the idea in the back of my head. Well, maybe I'll try it on my own. And finally, I said, okay, well, either go and do it or put it out of your head, because thinking about it is only gonna distract you. So I launched, and there we go.
And I'll tell you, you have overcome some challenges. And Martin's talked about this on his posts. He's had both of his hips replaced. I've seen family members go through that. Man, my hat's off to you. I've got to ask you, you have such a wealth and variety of experiences, and I'm humbled that you chose to share some of those with me this morning in this conversation. Thank you for that. But I would miss it totally, Martin, if I didn't ask you to share with this audience your biggest piece of intentional encouragement and how you keep yourself encouraged on a day-to-day basis.
Well, encouraged, I strongly believe it comes from your foundation, and the foundation that I have is family and being surrounded with positive influences. I've touched on it. My parents, they're extremely supportive individuals. My sisters, they're constantly offering support and encouragement. So that's where I draw a lot of that from. But it also comes from within. It's the tools that I was brought up with and instilled with me over my childhood, and that's really that's really the where a lot of my encouragement comes from. It's from within, and you have to, people can push you, right? Like, people can cheer you on and push you from the sidelines, but at the end of the day, you have to be motivated. You have to hold yourself accountable and to whatever your standard is. So for me, I have an extremely high standard of myself. And only I can live up to that, right? I can't live up to someone else's expectation, only mine. So really, it's about accountability, foundation, and the positive influences that you keep in your life.
I love that, and I said that earlier today, Martin, to someone. You cannot pour from an empty bucket, and again, I love that you have found. That's the biggest thing, I think, Martin, is people don't know how to keep themselves encouraged. And you just beautifully summed that up so well for us. So I thank you. Let folks know how they can connect with you, find your resources, anything else that you want to share with them about what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so the best place is on LinkedIn. Follow me or connect with me. You can search the Outbound Sales Guy or Martin MacArthur, and I'm sure, Brian, you'll have the show notes with my LinkedIn profile. People can also visit www.theoutboundsalesguy.com. And other than that, just really working hard on growing the Outbound Sales Guy and helping early stage companies get to that next level of growth that they're looking for.
I said it before and I'll say it again. One of the kindest individuals that I know, Martin MacArthur. Martin, I am grateful. I've wanted to do this for a while, have this conversation with you. I'm so grateful that we were able to do it. Thank you for joining me today on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Really happy to be here, and thanks again for having me.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.